All right, cool. So in this video, I'm going to tell you why your agents are not performing the way that they should and the way that you would, and how to fix that. So we're going to talk about context injections for your agents. So here's the key question. What should your agent know? And in this video, I'm going to share 3 ways of sharing context with your agent. And I'm going to tell you also at the end, which is the best one for you. So we know that every agent needs context, and the key point here is understanding where the context should live. So I'm presenting you 3 different layers. Okay, starting from the first one, we're going to go into the details of each one. But the first one is the static markdown, which is basically a compilation of rules that don't change over time. Then we have a fine-tuning of the context itself, which is baked into the model. We'll see the details later on. And then the third layer, which is probably the most performing one and the one that's most suitable in many cases, or at least in the cases I've been working on, which is the dynamic lookup. And you can read there that that's something that gets fetched at runtime. We'll see more details later on. Once again, the key point here is understanding where the context should live, because if you pick the wrong one, the agent itself will lose in performances. Right, cool. Let's deep dive and discuss about the 3 different layers. So the static markdown file is a compilation of anything that's through today, through the next month, and through the next year. So this is like a set of stable rules, okay, formatting convention, policies, and so on. It's fairly easy to write it and read it for the model, and the agent reads it at every run. Probably this is the most important part. So there's no training required for this. I'm also saying that this should be most of your context in several cases. So that's important too. One other important thing that I forgot to put here, but I think it's actually worth it to discuss, is this. So your static stable rule formatting convention are okay for, I don't know, this month. If that changes over time because your agent or your initial scope changes, you can go back into this markdown file and update it, okay, with the new version of your policies and things like that. I'm not saying that once you set out the policies you cannot change it over time. You can change it, yeah, if the new versions stay stable for the next runs. Let's move to the second layer, which is the fine tuning. So this is the heavy option. It's very powerful, but it's something that you do like further down the line. Once you have understood and once you have used your agent and once you have consolidated its capacity, okay? So this is important and powerful because it bakes behavior directly into the models, and it's slow and it's expensive as well. So you need to consider that if you're looking at token consumption and costs. And every update means retraining the agent. So this is something that you want to be aware of. Moving to the third layer, which is probably one of the less used nowadays, but it's actually one that has like the most impact in most of the cases I'm dealing with every day, which is dynamic runtime lookups. So this is basically like a way to handle exceptions, right? So stuff that's true for certain specific cases. And the key point here is that your agent doesn't read it from the moment it starts, but it reads it only when we meet some criteria, okay? And it's read mid-task. So it doesn't cost anything until you actually read it. Your agent actually read it, okay? So, and this is built to handle exceptions, not general knowledge. Right, so let's now try to go through like a classic example to get like a better idea of what's happening. So let's suppose that we have an agent called PurchaseOrderAgent, okay? And the scope of this agent is to read PDFs, and eventually, after that, we want the agent to create purchase orders in the system. Okay, cool. So this is like a simple task, right? So read PDF and create purchase order in the system that you can simply automate with any agent. So let's now discuss what kind of context we want to share with agent every time we initiate it. So the first thing that we want to do is, of course, provide some static markdown file that contains things like policies and general rules. Okay, so this is like the first thing that we want to share with our agent, okay, which is the initial part. then there is another important thing that we can think of, right? Let's suppose that the agent is reading PDFs and is able to do all the things that you would expect, looking at the vendors, looking at items, and, recognizing differences and other stuff like that. So what we can think, though, is that if we know that we have some vendors that are sharing with us information that are always wrong, or for whatever reason they share codes that are different, and every time are different in the document that they share with us. For whatever reason, they are not able to print out on the PDF the code that we use, but they can only print their code. We can think of creating context, put it this way, that allows the agent to read and check for these specific exceptions, right? And how would that work? For example, we can think of a process like this. So when we do it like in another code, we initiate the read process, and then we do a dynamic lookup on vendors, right? So that's process 1, that's process 2, and then we have an outcome like this. Exception on vendor, right? We have like a flow that comes out like this. If we realize that the vendor who sent the PDF belongs to this specific list where we handle the exception, then we do a lookup, of exception, right? And then we feed this information into the agent, right? So there is like a process that works out to be like a context injection on agent. So now the agent is aware of the exception, and if this doesn't happen, so the vendor it's not in this list, so the result of this lookup is result of lookup is equal to blank. Okay, I'll put it this way, blank. No other context gets injected into the system, okay, because whatever we have in the starting Markdown file is already enough for the agent to process everything, whilst the dynamic context is nothing but this thing here, right? So once we've done the lookup, the system and the agent is able to retrieve dynamically the context. Apologies, this here, and then we inject this context into the agent. Okay, so you see like the full flow from here to here. So now let me clear these arrows up a little bit so I can talk about another important aspect of it. So this step here where we do the dynamic lookup on vendor, this is nothing but a tool, right? So we have a tool here, okay, that the agent uses. Maybe it's so-called something like vendor exceptions, lookup, that is made available to the agent itself, okay, and allows the agent to query the list of all the exceptions and return the information back to us in case we have like a match, or in case we don't have a match. So why this is actually better than we said also that we have the fine-tuning part of the context. Why this approach here is actually better than having the fine-tuning already baked in. So it's fairly easy and intuitive. So if you think about what happens like inside the agent itself, so this tool is super optimized because it runs like a lookup, check if there is a validation, and if there's no validation, okay, if there's no exception, it's just like skip entirely this part and then goes through the standard process of matching the vendors in the system, matching the item, looking at the location and things like that. But rather than providing a full static list into the system, into the agent itself to read, we just compile a small list. Okay, so it's much easier to read through a list of several matches if you have indeed the need of doing that, than compared to reading the 400, 500 vendors you have in the system every time before actually having the need to do that. So this key point is indeed very important, because we're moving, and this is like the clear shift. We're moving from a static chat box to an agent with tool that is also capable of calling the tool when it's needed. Okay, so this is like the way to go. You want agent to have tool made available available to them so that they can call the tools. Okay, so that's fairly important. Another important thing that you have to consider is that this approach can be applied to more or less every other process that you have in a company. So if you ever want to build something, that's important. That's very important. Keep in mind that this approach can be leveraged for any other processes that you have in the system and you have in your company. Okay, I hope this video was helpful, and in case you want to reach out for some support, I'm very happy to do it. Just drop a comment and I'll reach out. Thanks for watching.